All right, so the question is, do I regret majoring in finance? What is up, guys? Welcome back to another video. My name is Nash, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about how it feels to have graduated with a finance degree, with a bachelor's in finance, and then having to go into the workforce and just to kind of like see if it's something that I actually like doing or if I would go back in time and major in something else. I graduated back in May of 2020, so it's been about 2 years actually. So I started working a few months before I graduated. Everything was online, so I was able to work a full-time job as well as take classes online. I did that for about 2 months. Then I graduated in May, and then I started working full time, right? So my first job was actually a finance job, which was a financial analyst position. But this was for an insurance company. This was a position that focused on insurance premiums, claims. So those were the numbers that we were working with. So think about anything that a financial analyst does. So I was doing all that, but using insurance specific numbers, right? The premiums that come in, the claims that go out, and creating a bunch of models. So this was something that was really exciting for me because I was getting to practice the skills that I learned in college when it comes to those Microsoft Excel classes, right? I had taken a bunch of Excel certification classes. So I was kind of like I was not an expert, but I knew how to use it. I knew how to do things. So this job, just like any other financial analyst position, focused on a lot of technical skills, right? Because think about this, you're an entry level employee and analyst, and you get all the work that nobody wants to do, right? So as you rank up, as you climb the corporate ladder, the less technical work you have to do, right? It turns into more of a critical thinking role. So if you are on the bottom of that, you're going to be doing all the technical work. So it helped a lot for me to know, how to use Excel as well as, just understanding business and basic accounting as well, right? Because if you're dealing with money, you have to understand accounting, especially basic accounting. And also this position was not client facing, which means I did not have to talk to clients. I did not have to deal with any clients that were upset. It was essentially a back office job where you're just crunching the numbers, right? So the most communication that I got when it came to work was communicating to maybe a supervisor or manager, explaining what the numbers meant, right? Because sometimes you work on numbers and they make sense to you, but to somebody else, they don't really make sense. So those were the minimal communication requirements that I had, was to essentially explain something that might not be clear to someone who does not understand how I broke down the numbers. So I was doing that for about a year, and I was promoted to a supervisor position, which was essentially doing the same thing as an analyst, but also training other analysts and reviewing their work. So it was kind of like the same thing, but with added responsibilities. All right, so moving on to 2022, which is 2 years later, about 2 months ago, I switched over to business consulting for one of the big four consulting firms. Now, this is a totally different position, right? Like I said before, when I was an analyst, it took a lot of technical skills and some critical thinking, but the main thing was knowing your technical skills, right? Because your job was to make the numbers make sense, right? Now I switched over to consulting. Something surprising happened. The things kind of like switched around. Now the most important thing that I noticed that you have to have is critical thinking skills, right? Especially when it comes to what I do. I work in financial risk management consulting, where we are managing risk for financial institutions, right? Think about banks and things like that. So we're kind of like managing risk. So what they usually do is that they give you a lot of information, right? Like, we have this information, we want to manage the risk that comes with it, right? And you have to be really creative and think critically on how you can come up with solutions. First off, you have to really identify the risk before you can solve it, or before you can come up with solutions and things like that to manage that risk. So this requires a lot of critical thinking and less of those technical skills. Now when it comes to the technical skills that you might need, is that if you're working with 10 different clients, or a good example is each client is going to have their own systems, right, in place that they use to manage resources and things like that. Now, if you're jumping from client to client, you are going to be exposed to different systems that the clients use. So you have to be able to have those technical skills, right? So these aren't technical skills that you can go practice, because you cannot anticipate what systems the client uses. So you have to critically think, right? If you're introduced to something like PeopleSoft, or maybe you're introduced to something else, you have to be able to figure it out. That's where those critical thinking skills come in. Now, if I go back to being an analyst, all I had to know was Microsoft Excel and maybe one other thing, right? And that is something that I really, really know. Now, moving on to being a consultant, you don't have to know Microsoft Excel. You just have to have a basic understanding and make things work. And what's going to be more important is going to be critical thinking skills. Now, when I look back to some of the classes that I took in college, I'm thinking about my risk management class that I took. That was one of my favorite classes that I took in college. I never thought I was going to end up working in risk management, but that class is turning out to be really, really important. Now, the other thing is going to be money and banking. That was a basic finance class that I took in college. Now, working with financial institutions, you have to really understand how money works in banking, and I'm having to think about what I learned in that class in order to, to understand what I'm doing. And also, like I said before, if you are dealing with money, you have to be able to understand accounting because that's going to help you understand how money moves around. All right, so now to sum up those two positions, my first position was an analyst position. It only required a lot of technical skills, which were essentially Microsoft Excel and some other software, but you had to know Microsoft Excel. That was the requirement, right? You had to know how to use it. That's how you survived. You'd be in Microsoft Excel 24 hours, or the 8 hours you're working, or 9 hours, or 10 hours, you would be in Microsoft Excel. That's how you do the reports and things like that, right? So I never really got to use a lot of the skills that I learned in other finance classes. But then moving on to consulting, you have to do a lot of critical thinking. And in order to critically think about something, you have to have enough information, right? So all these different classes that I took, accounting, risk management, money and banking, and things like that, those are the classes that I find myself trying to remember what the professor was teaching. Now, putting work aside, we can talk about personal finance, right? Whenever you start a job, you need to understand how a 401k works, right? Before you even sign anything, right? You have to understand how benefits work, deductions, and things like that. You have to be able to understand those things, the investments that are in your 401k. You have to be able to do that. You start doing your own taxes, right? These are classes that finance actually teaches you in college. I took a class, I think the name of the class was Finance for Entrepreneurs, right? It talked about all these benefits. It talked about, deductions. It went into, benefits and 401ks and things like that, how employers provide these benefits to employees and how you can do it as an entrepreneur if you ever grew your company to that level. So I find myself thinking about this. That was probably the second most valuable class that I took in college when I was a finance major. I find myself tapping back into that class. If I want to do my taxes, maybe I'm doing deductions and things like that, right? I'm able to kind of like have an understanding. Even if I was going to get an accountant, right, I'll be able to know what they're talking about. I'll be able to ask more educated questions. Now, if you've watched my super old videos, you know that when I was a freshman in college, I used to be an accounting major for about a year. I think it was like a year and a half. And I switched over to finance. So that's why I have a lot of knowledge in accounting, because not only did I take the basic accounting classes, but I also took some of the advanced accounting classes as well, and then switched over to finance at the same time, which turned out to be a great combination. So majoring finance, the best thing that I ever did, and I would do it again if I was going to go back in time. But the only different thing I would do is pay more attention. But thank you so much for watching, guys. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have anything else to add to this. But thank you so much for watching. Make sure to go ahead and hit the subscribe button below if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.